Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the resurrection. We've talked about the resurrection accounts in the Bible and then Jesus' own resurrection. And we're going to spend several days now talking about 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which is the masterpiece um, on the resurrection, on Christian resurrection, on Jesus' resurrection and our own bodily resurrection. Um, in First Corinthians, there are these moments, 13. We call that, Paul's masterpiece, Paul's conversation about love, and it is just the language is so beautiful. It's as beautiful as the language of the book of Ecclesiastes or of Psalm 139. I mean, it's just or Psalm 103. It's art. It's artistry. We have reason, logic. We have argument. I don't mean that in a bad sense. I mean that in terms of the defense of the faith. We have we have all of that on display in First Corinthians chapter 15. It is Paul's masterpiece of reasoning, and it's to argue to establish that Jesus was raised in bodily form, and that we through him are going to be raised in bodily form. Why does he have to do this? Because people were denying it. People were denying either the bodily resurrection of Jesus or that we would be resurrected in bodily form. Um, this is evidence of Greek influence, not Jewish influence, leading the church, the early church, down the wrong path, and is based on Greek dualism, the notion that we are beings made up of flesh and spirit, and that they are two separate things, and they are not in any way in harmony, and that they are often opposed to each other. And since that's the case, there were different schools of thought. One would be since they are separate, what happens with one doesn't have any effect on the other. That I can dissipate and debauch my body and still have a pure spirit. And we see Paul addressing this earlier in First Corinthians when he quotes them saying, "The meat's for the belly and the belly for meats." God gave me a belly to enjoy all the food that I want. He gave me other body parts that I can enjoy as well. And Paul says, "No, you're both body and a corrupted spirit are going to be condemned." Or you could say things like, "Since my body is bad, my spirit is good, then I need to deny my body and I need to punish my body." And he addresses this in Colossians, the second chapter. You don't eat, you don't touch, you don't taste, you don't handle. You have to. And Paul says, "No, no, not at all. Um, your body and your spirit belong to God." He tells the Corinthians, "Your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit." First Corinthians 3, First Corinthians 6. Um, it's a holy place. And the body of Jesus was raised from the dead, and your body is going to be raised from the dead as well. So that's why. And this manifested itself in asceticism by the end of the first century. This is the false teaching in which Christians were saying Jesus only appeared to inhabit a human body, almost like he was a hologram, or maybe he was the alien inside a puppet or something like that. He only appeared to be in a body. That's what dokeo means. It's why doceticism, to appear. Um, and John is dealing with this when he says he calls people who believe this way, who don't believe in the bodily manifestation, the bodily incarnation, and the bodily resurrection of Jesus, antichrists in 1 John chapter 2, 1 John chapter 4, and in 2 John verse 7. That's why this is a serious issue, because the resurrection is the basic gospel. We'll talk about that tomorrow when we get into the first few verses. Um, I also want to talk about the arguments he's going to make. Or the way the argument is going to flow, I should say. This is the way the argument is going to flow. Verses chapter 1, verses 2 um, through 19, or excuse me, verses 1 through 11. He's going to talk about the fact of the resurrection. 12 through 19 of the necessity of the resurrection. And then 20 through 28, the assurance of the resurrection. 29 through 34, the logic of the resurrection. 35 through 50, the nature of our resurrection. And then in 51 through 50, the event of the resurrection when we are going to be raised. And so that's the way it's going to flow. One more thing before we leave today, and I know I've already hit my 5-minute mark. The Apostle Paul had such a broad education, and we've talked about this in the past during these sessions, that he had the best Jewish education available. He was trained at the feet of Gamaliel at the great synagogue in Jerusalem. I mean, this is the best Jewish school that existed. He has a classical education. We've seen him use with great facility and ease the Greek authors and Greek and Roman authors and to argue using their modes of expression, their modes of argumentation. We saw this in Acts 17. We saw it again in Acts 26 in different ways. Paul the philosopher, Paul the defendant. We also have talked about how he had a trade and a vocational education. We're going to see everything on display here. Everything that Paul is capable of intellectually here is on display. This is his tour de force, the tour de force of his mind, of his training, of his education, of what he's capable of doing as a persuader, as a philosopher, as as a thinker. It's all on display here, and I want us to be dazzled. I want us to be dazzled by the brilliance and the mind and the intellect of the Apostle Paul and how he was such a wonderful tool in the hands of the Holy Spirit to communicate biblical truth. So let's be looking at that tomorrow as well. It's so straightforward. It's so cause and effect. A leads to B. It's linear in its reasoning, and yet he taps his strengths as a rabbi, his strengths as a philosopher, his strengths as just a common sense thinker, a guy who measures twice before he cuts once. It's all on display here, everything that Paul's capable of intellectually, and we're going to be looking at that as well. We're going to pick up with verse 1 tomorrow, and we're going to read through verse 11. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.